IRS criminal investigation. Keep your hands where I can see them.
What is going on?
For 19 years, people at resort homes trusted Tammy Barcus with every dollar they had. Every single one of them was wrong too.
Please tell me what this is about.
$1.79 million embezzled from resort homes over 8 years.
500 checks with your boss's forged signature.
500 checks. 8 years. One signature, forged again and again by the woman the owner trusted to keep his books. By the time IRS criminal investigation finished cataloging what Tammy Barcus had done to resort homes, the file was thicker than the company's annual tax return. $1,793,688.87 gone. And on a federal sentencing exhibit, 3 photographs: a 2019 Dodge Ram Mega Cab, a Chevrolet Suburban Z71, and a Sea Chaser center console with a 350 horsepower Suzuki on the back, sitting on the trailer she had also paid for. Every dollar of it bought with checks signed in her boss's handwriting. Before we go any further, have you ever worked at a company small enough that one person handled all the money? Drop a comment and tell me what that person's name was. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. We hold the trusted ones accountable on this channel every single week. Tammy Lynn Barcus was born in 1969 on the eastern shore of Maryland, the kind of place where the salt air gets into the wood of every house and never quite leaves. Her father worked for the Worcester County Roads Department, running a grader through the marsh flats outside Snow Hill. Her mother kept the books for a small crab-picking operation in Crisfield, a yellow legal pad, a 10-key adding machine, and a metal cash box that lived under the kitchen sink. That was Tammy's first exposure to bookkeeping. She was 9 years old, watching her mother stack singles into rubber-banded bundles, and she remembered thinking that whoever held the money held everything else too. She went to Stephen Decatur High School in Berlin and graduated in 1987. Average grades. Her math teacher wrote on her senior report that she was quiet, accurate, never in a hurry to be noticed. She took a year of business courses at Warwick Community College in Salisbury, accounting fundamentals, intro to QuickBooks before QuickBooks really existed, a typing class on IBM Selectrix, and then she went to work. There was no out-of-state college, no big move. The Eastern Shore was hers, and she was the Eastern Shore's. Her first real job was at a marine supply store in West Ocean City, ringing up trailer lights and outboard parts for the charter captains who came in at 5 in the morning. She earned $5.25 an hour. She married a local electrician named Mike Barcus in 1991. They bought a small ranch house on a dirt lane outside Berlin for $46,000. 2 kids by 1996. A used Ford Aerostar in the driveway. A modest, careful Eastern Shore life. She took a part-time bookkeeping job at a roofing contractor in 1998 and another at a small marina office in 2002. She was good, quietly, almost invisibly good. She balanced ledgers to the penny. She remembered every vendor's invoice cycle. She knew which checks the owner liked to sign on Mondays and which he wanted to wait on. Bosses loved her because they never had to think about money when she was in the building. In the summer of 2005, a man named Robert, the owner of a small Ocean City home builder called Resort Homes, LLC, was looking for an office manager who could also keep books. He had 11 employees, 3 crews building shoreside houses on raised pilings, and an accountant in Salisbury who came in once a quarter. He needed somebody he could trust with everything in between. A friend at the marina recommended Tammy. Robert interviewed her in his office above the lumberyard. She wore a navy blouse and brown loafers. She brought a manila folder with 3 years of clean references and a sample chart of accounts she had built for her last employer. The interview lasted 40 minutes. He hired her on the spot. Starting salary, $36,000 a year, plus health insurance and 2 weeks of vacation. Her first day was August 15th, 2005. She drove to the office in a 1998 Toyota Camry with 142,000 miles on it. She brought her own coffee mug, a chipped white one that said, "World's Okayest Aunt." She sat down at the desk Robert had cleared for her, opened the desktop QuickBooks file, and began the work that would define the next 19 years of her life. For the first decade, she was exactly what Robert thought he had hired. Her annual reviews, kept in a thin manila folder in the back of a 4-drawer Hahn filing cabinet, used the same handful of words year after year. Reliable, discreet, independent, doesn't need to be told twice. In 2009, when the recession nearly took resort homes under and Robert had to lay off 2 framers, Tammy went a full pay cycle without cashing her own paycheck and never mentioned it. He found out from the bank and tried to thank her. She waved him off. "It's a small company," she told him. "We all do what we have to." She got a raise every year. By 2015, she was earning $68,000 and running the entire back office. Payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, the line of credit, the vendor relationships, the quarterly tax filings, the bank reconciliations. Robert signed checks once a week, on Friday mornings, sitting at her desk while she handed them to him from a leather folder. He signed them in blue Pilot G2 ink, the same pen she kept in a coffee cup on her desk. He never read the memo lines. He had no reason to. She and Mike paid off the ranch house in 2014. Their kids were grown, a daughter at Salisbury University, a son in the Coast Guard. Mike's electrical business was steady. They drove modest cars and took 1 fishing trip a year to the Outer Banks. By every outside measure, the Barcus family was exactly what they appeared to be. Solid, careful, Eastern Shore solid. Tammy was the office manager who never missed a Christmas party at Robert's house, who brought a homemade crab dip and stayed late to help his wife load the dishwasher. That trust was about to be tested. Resort Homes, LLC was the kind of company the Eastern Shore is built on. 11 full-time employees at its peak, 3 framing crews, 1 drywall sub on retainer, Robert at the top, his son running the field, and Tammy holding everything else together from a single office above a lumber yard off Route 50. The company did between 4 and 8 custom homes a year, beach houses on Assateague-facing lots, raised piling builds in West Ocean City, the occasional tear-down and rebuild on the Bayside. Contract prices ran from $600,000 to over $2 million. The cash that moved through the company's business checking account at a regional bank in Berlin was substantial. On any given week, Resort Homes might write 30 or 40 checks to lumber yards, to the concrete supplier, to electrical and plumbing subs, to permitting offices, to the IT vendor who maintained the server room, to the accountant in Salisbury, to the company's software providers. The system was the system that runs 10,000 small construction companies in this country. The owner trusted the bookkeeper. The bookkeeper handled everything. The accountant signed off on the year-end numbers based on what the bookkeeper handed him. The bank never questioned the signature card on file because the signature card on file was Robert's, and Robert was the man signing checks. Resort Homes had no internal audit, no second set of eyes on the bank statements, no segregation of duties. The person who entered the bills was the same person who cut the checks, the same person who reconciled the account, the same person who answered when a vendor called asking where their payment was. There was no fraud insurance policy with a fidelity bond requirement that would have demanded background checks and dual signatures. There was Robert, and there was Tammy, and there was 19 years of trust. The vulnerability inside that system was the same vulnerability inside every small business. When one person becomes the financial gatekeeper, that person is the system. Every check that left the building went through her hands. Every QuickBooks entry was made by her. Every bank statement that arrived in the mail was opened by her and reconciled by her and filed by her. Robert looked at the bottom line P&L once a quarter. He trusted what he saw because Tammy had built it, and Tammy had access to one more thing, the one thing that mattered most. She had years of watching Robert sign his name in blue Pilot G2 ink, thousands of times, across thousands of checks. She knew the way the R looked when he was in a hurry. She knew the way he crossed his T's. She knew the loop on his lowercase b, slightly open at the top, slanted left. She had been studying that signature for a decade. At some point, and the federal indictment never names the exact day, but the bank records do, she sat down at her desk with a blank check and a Pilot G2 in her right hand, and she practiced. Once, twice, a dozen times on scrap paper, and then on a check made payable to a vendor named on the books of Resort Homes, a vendor whose bank account she had quietly opened in her own name. The first check cleared in 2016. The Department of Justice would not say in open court exactly which one it was, or for how much. But the IRS case file documents the pattern that began that year and continued, uninterrupted, for the next 96 months. Between 2016 and October 2024, Tammy Barcus issued more than 500 fraudulently authorized checks from the business bank account of Resort Homes, LLC. She forged the signature of one of the company's owners on the face of each check. She made the checks payable to a vendor account she controlled. She deposited them into bank accounts in her own name and her family's name. And she used the proceeds to pay her personal expenses. The mechanism was almost mundane in its simplicity. She had set up a vendor inside Resort Homes' QuickBooks file with a generic, forgettable name. The kind of name a busy contractor's accountant glances at and assumes is a software subscription or an annual licensing fee. To the books of Resort Homes, that vendor looked like every other recurring expense. To the real world, that vendor was a bank account she controlled. She would print a check on the Resort Homes check stock, the same stock Robert signed every Friday morning. She would forge his signature on the face of the check. She would enter the disbursement into QuickBooks against the dummy vendor she controlled, coded against an expense line that wouldn't raise eyebrows on a year-end P&L. And then she would deposit the check, sometimes in person at the drive-thru window, sometimes via mobile deposit at the kitchen table after dinner. The first year, in 2016, the checks were small, a few $1,000s at a time. She used the money for credit card payments, the mortgage on a beach lot the Barcuses had bought on a whim, a home renovation. She kept it quiet. She kept it spaced out. She watched the cash flow at Resort Homes carefully. She wasn't going to drain so much that Robert would notice the line of credit getting drawn down. But a thing about embezzlement that every prosecutor will tell you, it always escalates. Always. There is no embezzler in the history of American federal court who started small, stayed small, and walked away. The first check cashes. Nothing happens. The second check cashes. Nothing happens. By the 10th check, the bookkeeper has stopped being afraid. By the 50th check, the bookkeeper has started to believe she has earned it. By 2018, the checks were larger. By 2020, she was running multiple forgeries per month. By 2022, she was on a steady cadence that the IRS would eventually map out across an 8-year timeline. A check every 5 to 7 business days, on average, with occasional bursts around vehicle purchases and boat payments. The money went somewhere. The money always goes somewhere. In 2019, the Barcuses bought a Dodge Ram megacab. The big 4-door, leather seats, factory tow package, sticker price north of $60,000. Bought it outright. No financing. The dealership in Salisbury would later remember the cashier's check and the casual confidence of the woman who wrote it. A Chevrolet Suburban Z71 came next, a second vehicle for a household of 2 adults whose kids had already moved out. Black, loaded, fully optioned, paid cash, and then the boat. A Sea Chaser Center console fishing boat with a 350 horsepower Suzuki outboard. A trailer to match. The kind of rig that turns heads at every ramp from Indian River to the Chesapeake. The kind of boat a man builds his weekends around. The kind of boat that, when you see it parked next to a small ranch house on a dirt lane outside Berlin, you assume the owner has done very, very well for himself. Nobody at Resort Homes asked. The kids were grown. Mike's electrical business was steady. Inheritance, maybe. A 401k rollover. None of Robert's business. He was glad for them. Meanwhile, inside QuickBooks, the cover-up was meticulous. Every fraudulent check entered against the vendor account. Every reconciliation balanced to the penny against the doctored bank statements. every quarterly report tied out to the year-end P&L. The accountant in Salisbury came in 4 times a year, looked at the books Tammy handed him, and said the same thing each time. "Looks good, Tam. Same time next quarter." The signs were there if anyone had been looking. The Ram in the lumber yard parking lot every morning. The Suburban replacing the old Camry. The photographs of the boat on the company secretary's Facebook page when she came in on a Monday and asked Tammy about the weekend. No one looked. No one checked. Quick question for you. If you owned a small business, when was the last time you personally reconciled your own bank statement? Be honest. Drop a yes or no in the comments. And subscribe if you haven't yet, because the next part of this story is exactly why that question matters. The Department of Justice's press release does not say what tripped the wire. The sentencing memorandum does not describe the catalyst in detail. What the public record shows is a single date, October 2024, and a single fact. Tammy Barcus's 19-year run at resort homes ended that month. What happens at a small company when the bookkeeper of 19 years suddenly isn't there anymore is the same thing that happens in every embezzlement case ever charged. The cover starts to peel. The most likely sequence, the one investigators in every case of this size will recognize, runs like this. Someone other than the bookkeeper opens a piece of mail she had always opened first. Maybe a bank statement, maybe a 1099 from a vendor, maybe a duplicate payment notice from a software company asking why an invoice had been paid twice in 3 months. Someone other than Tammy looks at it and frowns, and once one person frowns, another person looks. And once 2 people are looking, the questions start. Why is this vendor on our books at all? Who set them up? When was the last work order? Why are we paying them on a recurring monthly basis if no one in the field has ever heard of them? Why does the address on the W-9 not match the address the checks are going to? A forensic look at the bank statements would have shown the rest. 500 plus checks across 8 years, every one of them going to the same vendor account. Every one of them deposited into accounts in the name of Tammy Barcus and her family. The signature on the face of every check looking almost like Robert's. Close enough to fool a busy bank teller scanning a stack. Not close enough to fool a federal handwriting examiner with side-by-side exemplars. The referral to IRS criminal investigation came shortly after. The Washington, D.C. field office, led by Special Agent in Charge Kareem Carter, opened the case. Agents pulled bank records under federal subpoena. They pulled the QuickBooks file. They pulled the W-9 forms on the vendor. They cross-referenced the deposits against the Barcus family's personal accounts. They mapped the timeline. What had taken Tammy Barcus 9 years to build, federal agents took maybe 9 weeks to unwind. Not because they were clever, because the records were exactly the kind of records the IRS spends its days looking at. Deposits, disbursements, bank reconciliations. The IRS does not need to be tipped off about how embezzlement is laundered through a small business. They wrote the textbook on how embezzlement is laundered through a small business. By late winter, the case was complete. Assistant United States Attorney Jared Murphy, working out of the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland under U.S. Attorney Kelly O. Hayes, drafted a 3-count information: wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, tax evasion. And somewhere on a dirt lane outside Berlin, Tammy Barcus was about to find out that the 8 years she had spent watching nothing happen were over. What IRS criminal investigation built between the referral and the information is what federal prosecutors call a paper case, and what defense attorneys call unwinnable. There were no informants. There was no wiretap. There was no consensual recording. There was no smoking gun email. There was simply paper. Years and years and years of paper, and every page of it pointed at Tammy Barcus. The core of the file was the bank record subpoena returns. Investigators pulled the complete history of the resort home's business operating account from 2016 through October 2024. They had every check image, front and back. The fronts showed the forged signature. The backs showed the endorsement and the deposit account. The deposit account, traced through Bank of First Deposit records, traced back to a single name, Tammy Barcus of Berlin, Maryland. The second layer was the QuickBooks file. Forensic accountants pulled the entire general ledger and ran it against the bank record. Every fraudulent check had been entered against a single vendor name. That vendor name had been created inside QuickBooks by user T. Barcus on a single date in early 2016, a date that, the accountants noted, fell on a Saturday when no other entries were made in the file. The third layer was the personal financial picture. Investigators mapped the Barcus family's deposits against the disbursements from the resort homes account. Every one of the more than 500 fraudulent checks had a matching deposit in a Barcus-controlled account, usually within 48 hours. From those accounts, the money flowed outward, to credit card payments, to mortgage payments on the family home and on a second property, to a Salisbury Dodge dealer, to a Chevrolet dealer, to a marine dealer on Route 50, and to recurring household expenses. The lifestyle ledger inside the government's sentencing memorandum was the part that, when the case eventually became public, made local readers stop and reread the paragraph. The 2019 Dodge Ram Mega Cab, the Chevrolet Suburban Z71, the Sea Chaser Center Console fishing boat with the 350 horsepower Suzuki outboard, the trailer to match, photographs of each, included as exhibits in the sentencing filing, sitting on the property of a household whose tax returns reported nothing close to the income required to support them. The fourth layer was the tax piece, the part that IRS criminal investigation cared about most. None of the embezzled income had been reported. None of it had been declared. The Barcus household's federal returns for 2016 through 2023 showed only the legitimate wages from resort homes and Mike's electrical business. The government calculated the unpaid tax loss at over $562,000. The fifth layer, and the one that gave the second federal count its teeth, was the signature itself. A federal question document examiner compared the signature on dozens of the fraudulent checks against known exemplars of the owner of resort homes. The conclusion was unambiguous. The signatures had been written by a different hand, a practiced hand, a hand that had been studying the owner's signature for many years. That is what aggravated identity theft means in federal court. Not the dramatic version, the clinical version. You used another person's identifying information, in this case, the unique stroke pattern of his signature, to commit a separate felony. The statute carries a mandatory 2-year sentence, consecutive, on top of everything else. Congress wrote it that way on purpose. And then there was the photograph that would eventually be marked as a government's exhibit in the sentencing filing. A photograph of the Sea Chaser, a center console fishing boat with the 350 HP Suzuki on the back, sitting on the trailer she had also paid for, all of it bought with checks signed in her boss's handwriting. It was the kind of exhibit a prosecutor doesn't have to explain. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the United States Attorney's Office in Baltimore. By the time it was on Tammy Barcus's calendar, the information had already been drafted. The plea negotiations were already underway. Her defense attorney had already received a copy of the discovery file, the bank records, the QuickBooks export, the signature exemplars, the photographs of the boat. She sat across the conference table from AUSA Jared Murphy. An IRS CI special agent sat to his right. Her defense attorney sat to her left. There were folders on the table. There was a pitcher of water. There was the kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everyone in the room look exactly as tired as they are. Murphy opened a folder. He slid a single check image across the table. The front of the check. He slid a second image. The back of the check. He slid a third image. A resort home signature card with Robert's actual signature in his actual hand from 20 years earlier. "Ms. Barcus," he said, "this is one check. There are 512 more just like it." She looked at the check. Her defense attorney put a hand on her forearm. Murphy continued, "The deposits trace to your accounts. The QuickBooks entries were made by your login. The vendor on the books does not exist. The handwriting on the signature line is yours." Her attorney spoke first. "My client understands what's been presented. Murphy nodded. He pulled out one more photograph. The boat, the sea chaser, on the trailer, in the side yard of the small ranch house outside Berlin. "This is one of the exhibits we will be filing," he said. "There are 3 vehicles in the file as well. All of them were purchased with funds traceable to the resort home's account." Tammy Barcus looked at the photograph of the boat for a long time. She did not deny it. She did not say it was a misunderstanding. She did not say she was just doing her job. She did not say her boss was lying. She had spent 8 years lying to a computer and a quarterly accountant, and she could see, looking at a photograph of her own boat on her own trailer in her own side yard, that this was not a room where lying was going to work. She looked at her attorney. He looked at her. "I understand," she said, quietly. That was the entire confrontation. There were no raised voices. There were no broken-down tears. There was no theatrical denial. Just a 56-year-old woman from the eastern shore of Maryland, looking at a photograph of her own boat and understanding finally that the 8 years she had spent watching nothing happen were over. The plea agreement was finalized within weeks. On September 24, 2025, she stood in the United States District Court for the District of Maryland and pleaded guilty to all 3 counts: wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. The sentencing hearing was set for February 27, 2026, in the United States District Court for the District of Maryland. By the time it convened, the government's sentencing memorandum had been filed and was a matter of public record. The memorandum laid out the entire scheme: the 19 years inside resort homes, the 8 years of forgeries, the more than 500 checks, the vendor account, the doctored QuickBooks file, the unreported income, the unpaid taxes. The exhibits were attached: the photograph of the Sea Chaser, the photograph of the Dodge Ram Mega Cab, the photograph of the Chevrolet Suburban Z71, the lifestyle laid out in glossy color. The defense memorandum asked the court for leniency. It cited Tammy Barcus's lack of criminal history, her acceptance of responsibility, her cooperation with IRS-CI, her family ties to the community, her age. It described her as a woman who had made a series of bad decisions inside a job that, the defense argued, had given her too much access and too little oversight. A job at a company that, in the defense's framing, had failed to put in even the most basic internal controls. The government's response was simple. The company's failure to install internal controls did not commit 500 forgeries. Tammy Barcus did. The owner of Resort Homes filed a victim statement. It was read into the record. He described 19 years of trust. He described inviting Tammy to his Christmas parties. He described leaning on her during the recession. He described handing her his pen on Friday mornings because he trusted her to put the right checks in front of him. He described the morning he learned what she had actually been doing with that pen, and the weeks that followed when he could not bring himself to walk into his own office. He described what it had cost him, not in dollars, although it had cost him $1,793,688.87 in dollars, but in the part of himself that had believed he was a good judge of people. He told the court that he was not sure that part of him was ever coming back. The judge listened. The judge had read every page of every filing. The judge had seen the photograph of the boat. When the judge spoke, the language was measured. The judge noted that Tammy Barcus had not committed an impulsive crime. The judge noted that this was not a single bad decision. The judge noted that this was a deliberate, sustained, methodical course of conduct, executed over 96 months, comprising more than 500 separate criminal acts. The judge noted that each one of those acts was a fresh choice, a fresh decision to forge a man's name on a piece of his own paper. The judge noted that the trust she had been given was the kind of trust that holds a small company together, and that the breach of it was the kind of breach that does not heal. The sentence: 4 years in federal prison, 2 years of supervised release to follow. Restitution to her former employer in the amount of $1,793,688.87. Restitution to the Internal Revenue Service in the amount of just over $562,000. The wire fraud count carried a statutory maximum of 20 years. The tax evasion count carried a statutory maximum of 5 years. The aggravated identity theft count carried a mandatory 2-year sentence, consecutive to whatever else the court imposed. The negotiated 4-year disposition was, by federal standards, a careful number, long enough to mean something, short enough to acknowledge the early plea and the full cooperation. The boat would be sold, the Ram would be sold, the Suburban would be sold. The Bureau of Prisons would assign Tammy Barcus a federal register number and a designation, likely a low-security camp, given the nature of the offense and her lack of criminal history, possibly FPC Alderson in West Virginia, possibly FCI Hazleton's camp, possibly Aliceville's camp in Alabama. She would self-surrender on a date set by the court. She would walk through intake. She would surrender her glasses for inspection. She would surrender her wedding ring to a property officer. She would be issued khakis and a register card. Resort Homes, LLC continued operating. Robert hired a new bookkeeper. He also hired an outside accounting firm to come in monthly and reconcile the books in person. He installed dual signature requirements on any check over $5,000. He put fidelity bond coverage in place. The company that had run for 19 years on a single person's trust would never run that way again. The restitution will take the rest of Tammy Barcus's working life to pay. The 4 years of federal prison will cover the principal of nothing. The money is already gone, spent on a truck and a Suburban and a boat that will be sold at auction for a fraction of what she paid for them. What the 4 years will cover is something the federal sentencing guidelines never quite name out loud. The price of treating a small Eastern Shore company like a personal bank account for 96 months. 500 checks. 1 signature. 8 years. $1,790,000. A bookkeeper who became the system and then bled the system dry. This case was infuriating. But the case on your screen right now, the one playing right-hand side, is the kind of betrayal that takes years to put back together. Click it now.